Hello. This is for section 2 of 804, and this is about your discussion on week 5, which dealt with your multicultural curriculum. And I wanted to praise that both of these classes I have, 804s, had wonderful discussions about multicultural curriculum. And a lot of it is because you're very different circumstances. All of you teach, and some of you are in Japan, Hong Kong. In my other class, I have somebody in Netherlands, Dutch, Netherlands. And then, so what did I come up with? And what do I see in your discussions? Well, a lot of you talked about language. Some of you are ESL or deal with diverse populations where you may have Chinese, Mandarin, or Spanish and Arabic if you happen to live near Omaha, or you may have Spanish and somebody had Karen, a group from Southeast Asia, refugees, and that you still have, one of the things that I know somebody mentioned was you had some teachers that were still shocked if they heard another language spoken in the hallways, which kind of shocks me that they'd be shocked, but it's very important people understand. I have a PowerPoint on this. I don't like PowerPoints. I'd rather just tell you. If I could send it to you. And it talks about the aspects of learning English as a second language. And one of those is the silent period, which we all go through when we learn our first language. We spend a lot of time listening and not saying anything. When we're an infant, we don't speak for a year and a half or so. And we just have input. And you have to have that silent period where you take in information before you can produce it. Our modern Spanish classes in high school or whatever, French, people want you to produce and take a quiz after the first couple of days. But that's actually not the way language is learned, but that's how we do it because we have to test people. What I felt near the end, and I didn't get all the names down, but a lot of you had good stuff to say, is that you spent time doing one of it, several things, either having people that were translators in your school, especially at conferences, but also that you took time to learn some basic phrases in the languages of your students. But you can do that. It's not too hard to learn 5 phrases. I mean, how hard is that? It's great with parents and stuff. I noticed that Michelle Werdeman, you talked about your school's poor and that you learned a lot of not only Spanish, but slang terms that other kids might use. Language is language. It may not necessarily be a non-English language. But it's very important that you have good translators and hopefully not just other kids. That's a little problem. If kids get in trouble because other kids said they said something in Spanish that's bad, you got kids testifying against kids. That's not going to build community. So it's better to have actual Spanish speakers or whatever. Socioeconomic status got a lot of attention. Some of the things that I know, McKenna, you talked about wealth and status is a big deal in your town. And you were teaching literature, and The Great Gatsby from the 20s is a great novel, and come to me in a minute who wrote it. But what was interesting was it's a novel about wealthy people, and that poor kids that wouldn't quite understand it. They knew that people had money, but it was people in the 20s. But the thing is, they weren't aware of the close social class distinctions. Americans like to think we don't have social classes, but we do. In other countries, it's you know it. If in Latin America, you know what social class you are. And other parts of Europe or places, depending on where you are, there's an established social class. There's definitely who's top dog, who's bottom dog, and who's in between dog. Who's in between. So social class is a big deal, whether it's ranchers and farm kids versus the kids that live in the trailer park. There was one here about the bus kids because kids have been identified. Brenda, I think you'd mentioned that. I think it was in Columbus, the kids that get a ride on the bus. So the bus kids, and they tend to be minority kids, Hispanic. And so there can be attitudes about that. Oh, you ride the bus. Well, we have our own car, or our parents pick us up. I really like that little kind of depressing, but Joe, Jensen, your talk about teaching in the Japanese English school and how you kind of have the tyranny of Australian English. Australia's not that big, you know. We always think who's the biggest? Well, obviously, the United States is very large compared to Australia, but tomato, and sometimes you get put down for the way you speak English, which is a really good example of the way ESL learners are put down because they don't speak English very well. But that's not exactly helpful to you as a teacher. You don't want to experience discrimination. But I just wanted to bring that up because that was interesting. And several of you talked about teachers being set up that sometimes when there's a change in the reading program, they move a new person who doesn't have much authority. They move them to a different school. To a different grade. And then they're put in charge of teaching the fourth grade English. And then the fourth graders get tested and they say, oh, they didn't do very well. I guess that new teacher wasn't very good. So I remember they used to test in Nebraska. It was like first and fourth and eighth and 11th grade or something. And so then there would be this setup, oh, we're going to put you in eighth grade, or we're going to put you teaching 11th grade. That's where the tests come out. Oh gosh, and then people assume that you have to do everything, and that if it turns out okay, then you taught them what you had to teach them in that 1 year. Some really good approaches to multicultural education. I like Tanner, turns out it's page 6. Tanner Ellis. I liked it. Do you take the devil's advocate approach to teach critical thinking? Somebody's pro-choice on abortion or anti-abortion or whatever you want to call it. Regardless of your opinion, you make them deal with the opposing opinion. That's how we teach civics. Same thing. Your approach in there is very, very healthy, so I'd recommend that. Tanner's statement about, and then also some things about things that happen in the school about how teachers teach teachers. There was quite a bit in this particular discussion of teachers mistreating teachers, teachers ignoring teachers, maybe the administration favors certain teachers, or the parents or kids complain and the administration finds fault with the teacher instead of backing the teacher, which is just horrible. How discouraging. Alex Sash, you had a really interesting one here. You talk about being in a 95% white English-speaking class. It said, when I became teacher at Grand Island, it was a huge learning curve as many of my students spoke English as a second language. Being a math teacher, I attempted to connect with them visually. As I have said, you're not a language person, so you tried to incorporate visual images and other languages into your lesson. You tried to connect with your students by learning more about them. So you don't have to learn Spanish, but you need to let the students know that you want to know about them, that you care about them. That buys you a huge amount of time and credibility with those students. Interesting discussion. You talk about a student who joined the show choir and didn't have the money for it, but there was kind of money raised to help them. And that's opportunity or access to use technology or access to even the kids are in town in Omaha and don't get to go to the zoo to see the jellyfish or the other animals. You may have kids that have money to go do anything all over the world, and other kids that can't go across town just to go to the zoo. That's accessibility to education. Again, the male-female dedication to equity. And you probably see that in the past there's been questions about people ask questions, but they really don't want to listen to the teacher's input. They just want to see if you're going to criticize them or something. And that's sad. I mean, the administrator's first goal should be to support the teachers and to back them up, not to question them or to undercut them in some way. That's always an issue. Really, 1.9 million. That's a lot of money. Somebody can plan on raising $1 million. So I'm getting a little tired. My cold is running me down. I think this one was by Stephanie about teaching multiculturally. What aspects of multiculturals are pertinent? And you said, well, all of them. When you teach something in multicultural ed, if you teach English or literature or economics, whatever it is, you want to find examples that's pertinent to them and not just strictly within what I call American culture. I mean, you mentioned in here, and I know a lot of you do, ethnicity, gender, orientation, religion, some of these. We're very nervous about discussing these. I like to talk politics, but the problem is when you talk politics, if you sound like you're going to endorse a certain person or not endorse a certain person, then people say, oh, you're teaching my kids to dislike the president or dislike the senator. And you shouldn't be teaching politics. No, you should be teaching critical thinking, but the key is to do the critical thinking without turning it into just propaganda, trying to convince somebody, yeah, you got to vote for the Democrats, or Tulsi Gabbard is a libertarian, you got to vote for her. And there's one thing that offends people is if the teacher just mumbles on and tries to get kids to endorse certain perspectives on politics. I had my daughter had a guy at Lexington who was like that. It was always irritating to have my daughter contradict me on politics, especially when she just got it from somebody who had a very, very conservative viewpoint and was pretty much embedded this stuff in her, you know. Okay. Now, I wanted to mention a couple of things from my first class. Let me see if there's anything else there. Tanner, Alex, Michelle. I really liked, Michelle, you talked about Hong Kong and how there's a big argument in classrooms in Hong Kong. Are they connected to China? Are they connected to Hong Kong? Are they connected to another town nearby called Tai Po? And students, you're trying to get them to think about you're part of something bigger. That doesn't mean the bigger thing's bad, but, and I would think Hong Kong is part of China. No one's arguing in that now because it went back to China at the end of the British lease. But still, there's a lot of tension over politics and things like that. So you're part of China, but you're not with China in a mental state. So we dealt with poverty, with international issues. I think it pretty much covers it all. My other class, I had some interesting stuff in there, and what it was I had students talk about sexual orientation, which some of you would be uncomfortable with. just bringing it up. And really young kids, you're not going to be able to, because they don't have the concept to understand that. But for the most part, I'm sure there's a few exceptions. But True Colors is a group founded in a school back east, and it's a group that students can go to in the school, and they talk about issues of transsexualism or being bi or being gay or being, any of those things. Is that it's a place where they can talk about it. Now, I would always avoid, if you go to cities where, if you go someplace and there have been issues. I know in some southern states there have been issues with transsexual individuals being murdered, and so you want to think about where you're going and what the neighborhood's like and what your protection is. So I just mention that because that hate speech can be a terrible problem. Okay, well, I'm basically kind of done here. I think we got most of it covered. And I want to thank you, and I'll see you on next week when we do the class. Sorry, I'm a little tired. I take this medicine, it just grinds me down. I do not like colds.